There is a dangerous comfort in what feels safe. It wraps itself around your decisions like a warm blanket, convincing you that staying where you are is wisdom, that avoiding risk is intelligence, that maintaining the familiar is strength. But if you look closely, if you are honest with yourself for just a moment, you will realize something unsettling. What you call safety is often nothing more than fear wearing a respectable disguise. Safety has a seductive voice. It tells you, be realistic. It whispers, don't push too hard. It reassures you, this is good enough. And slowly, quietly, without drama or noise, it begins to shrink your world. Not all at once, not in ways that alarm you, but in subtle compromises, tiny retreats, small acts of hesitation that accumulate over time until one day you wake up and wonder where your fire went. Because the truth is, safety rarely expands your life. Safety preserves. Right there, safety maintains. Safety protects what already exists. But growth, real growth, demands something entirely different. Growth asks you to walk into uncertainty. Growth requires discomfort. Growth insists that you move beyond the edges of what feels secure. Think about it. Nothing extraordinary has ever emerged from a place of complete comfort. Strength is not built in ease. Confidence is not born from routine. The most powerful transformations in your life have never occurred when everything felt predictable and controlled. They happened when you stepped into something unknown, when your heart raced, when doubt crept in, when the outcome was not guaranteed. Yet most people spend their lives chasing the illusion of stability. They design their choices not around possibility, but around avoidance. They measure decisions by how little they might lose instead of how much they might gain. They wait for certainty in a world that never promises it. And that waiting becomes a trap because certainty is a myth. There is no moment when the path ahead becomes perfectly clear, when risk disappears, when fear falls silent and gives you permission to move. Life does not work that way. If you demand guarantees before you act, you will remain exactly where you are, watching time pass, watching others move forward, wondering why progress feels so distant. Safety, when misunderstood, becomes stagnation. It feels calm, but it is restrictive. It feels stable, but it is limiting. It feels protective, but it is quietly eroding your potential. Every day spent clinging to what feels safe is a day spent reinforcing the boundaries of your current life. And boundaries, once accepted, become walls. Ask yourself a difficult question. How many opportunities have you dismissed not because they were impossible, but because they were uncomfortable? How many ambitions have you postponed not because they lacked value, but because they required courage? How many versions of yourself have you denied simply because they live beyond the territory of familiarity? The human mind is wired for preservation. It prefers the known over the unknown, the predictable over the uncertain. That instinct once kept us alive, but in the modern world, that same instinct often keeps us small. It mistakes challenge for danger. It interprets growth as threat. It encourages retreat when expansion is exactly what is needed. And so people remain trapped in lives that feel safe but unfulfilled, stable but uninspiring, secure but strangely empty. Understand this clearly. Safety is not inherently wrong. There is wisdom and caution, value and preparation, strength and patience. But when safety becomes the primary driver of your choices, when it begins to dictate your limits, when it consistently overrides your aspirations, it ceases to be protection and becomes a prison. Your potential does not live inside your comfort zone. Your future does not exist. Within the boundaries of what feels easy, the life you imagine, the growth you seek, the strength you desire, they all reside on the other side of discomfort. Every expansion of your world requires a confrontation with uncertainty. Every meaningful step forward requires a willingness to feel unsteady. Every transformation requires leaving something familiar behind. That is the price. That is the path. That is the reality most people resist, and the very reason most people remain unchanged. But those who rise, those who evolve, those who create extraordinary lives, they develop a different relationship with safety. They do not worship it. They do not allow it to dominate their decisions. They recognize it for what it is, a temporary resting place, not a permanent residence. Fear has a language of its own, but most people never learn how to interpret it. They hear fear and assume it means stop. They feel fear and believe it signals danger. They experience fear and retreat, convinced that discomfort is a warning rather than an invitation. But fear, in many of the most important moments of your life, is not telling you to turn back. It is pointing directly toward the very growth you claim to want. Consider how fear actually behaves. It does not arise when you repeat what is easy. It does not disturb you when you stay within routines you have already mastered. Fear rarely shook. Owls up when you are playing small, thinking small, living small. No, fear becomes loud precisely when you stand at the edge of something that could change you. That anxiety before a bold decision, that tension before a necessary conversation, that hesitation before a new opportunity. Those sensations are not accidents, they are signals. Fear is often the mind's response to unfamiliar territory. The unknown triggers it. The possibility of change awakens it. The prospect of expansion provokes it. Yet instead of recognizing fear as a natural companion to growth, many people treat it as an enemy that must be obeyed. But what if fear is not an obstacle? What if fear is an indicator? Imagine fear as a spotlight rather than a barrier, a spotlight illuminating the precise areas of your life where movement would matter most. Because if something truly holds no significance for you, if it carries no potential to stretch your abilities or challenge your identity, fear rarely attaches itself to it. Fear is selective, fear is strategic, fear gathers around possibility. When you feel fear, something important is usually at stake. Your mind is reacting not to certain disaster, but to uncertainty. And uncertainty is the birthplace of every meaningful advancement. Every new skill, every transformation, every breakthrough begins in territory that feels unstable. The discomfort is not heavy, dense, that you are on the wrong path. Often it is proof that you are stepping beyond the limits of your current self. Yet people misread this experience constantly. They say, this feels scary, so it must be wrong. They say, I don't feel ready, so I should wait. They say, I'm uncomfortable, so I should avoid this, without realizing that readiness is rarely a prerequisite for growth. Readiness is usually the result of growth. You do not become confident before you act. You become confident because you act. You do not eliminate fear before moving forward. You diminish fear by moving forward. Fear loses authority when it is no longer treated as a command. It becomes information instead of instruction. Think about the moments in your life that shaped you the most, the decisions that changed your direction, the risks that altered your confidence. At the time, they likely felt uncertain, intimidating, even overwhelming, and yet looking back, those very moments often become the source of your strength, your wisdom, your resilience. Fear was present then too, but fear was not the enemy. Fear was the doorway. The problem is not fear itself. Fear is part of the human condition. The problem is interpretation. The meaning you assign to fear determines whether it paralyzes you or propels you. If fear means danger, you freeze. If fear means growth, you move. And movement shall angus everything. Because once you begin seeing fear as a signal, your relationship with challenge transforms. Instead of asking, how do I avoid this feeling, you begin asking, what is this feeling trying to show me? Instead of shrinking from discomfort, you become curious about it. Instead of retreating at the first sign of uncertainty, you recognize that uncertainty is where evolution begins. Fear in this light becomes a compass, not guiding you towards safety, but guiding you toward expansion. It highlights the conversations you need to have, the opportunities you need to take. It reveals where your current limits exist. And limits, once identified, can be challenged, but only if you are willing to reinterpret the signal, only if you refuse to let temporary discomfort dictate permanent decisions. Only if you understand that fear's presence does not predict failure, it often accompanies progress. Growth feels unfamiliar by definition. Progress feels uncertain by nature. Advancement feels uncomfortable by necessity. If you wait for ease before acting, you will wait indefinitely. But if you learn to move with fear instead of against it, you unlock momentum that most people never experience. Hesitation rarely feels like a dramatic decision. It does not announce itself as a life-altering mistake. It feels harmless, almost reasonable. Not now, maybe later. I just need more time. These phrases sound innocent, even responsible. But what most people fail to recognize is that hesitation has a cost, and that cost is far greater than it appears in the moment. Time is the one resource that moves in only one direction. You cannot pause it, you cannot store it, you cannot recover it once it is gone. Yet people treat time as though it were endlessly renewable, as though opportunities will wait patiently, as though the future will always offer another chance identical to the present. It will not. Every delay reshapes your trajectory, often invisibly. While you are postponing action, life is still advancing, circumstances are changing, doors are closing, momentum is shifting, the world does not freeze while you deliberate. It moves forward with or without you. And the tragedy of hesitation is that it disguises itself as safety. When you hesitate, you feel protected from risk. You feel insulated from failure. You feel temporarily secure. But beneath that surface comfort, something else is happening. Confidence begins to erode. Self-trust weakens. The mind absorbs a subtle but powerful lesson. I do not act when it matters. That lesson compounds because identity is shaped by repeated behavior. Every time you step back from a decision you know you should make, every time you silence an instinct pushing you forward, you reinforce a version of yourself that hesitates, that doubts, that waits, not because you lack ability, but because you have practiced delay. Understand this clearly. Hesitation is not neutral. It is training. Training your mind to associate uncertainty with inaction, training your confidence to retreat instead of engage, training your potential to remain unrealized. People often imagine failure as the greatest threat to success, but hesitation can be far more destructive precisely because it does not feel like failure. It feels like patience. It feels like caution. It feels justified. Yet while failure provides feedback, hesitation provides nothing but stagnation. Failure teaches, delay drains. Think of the opportunities that exist only within a narrow window. A conversation that needed courage, a chance that required boldness, an idea that demanded immediate movement. In the moment, hesitation whispers, there will be another time. But life rarely replicates conditions perfectly. The moment passes, the context shifts, and what once felt possible slowly becomes distant, not because you waited. There is also a psychological weight carried by prolonged hesitation. Unmade decisions do not disappear. They linger in the mind, consuming energy, creating tension, generating a low-grade anxiety that follows you through your day. The mental burden of what should I do often becomes heavier than the discomfort of decisive action. Indecision is exhausting. It occupies attention without producing progress. It generates stress without delivering results. It traps you in a cycle of overthinking where imagination magnifies risks, doubts multiply, and clarity becomes increasingly elusive. Meanwhile,
Decisive individuals operate differently.
They understand something essential. Action creates information. Movement generates clarity. Progress, even imperfect progress, dissolves uncertainty faster than contemplation ever can. They do not wait for perfect confidence. They build confidence through movement. They do not demand guarantees. They accept growth. Hesitation convinces you that delay reduces danger, but in reality, delay often amplifies fear. The longer you wait, the larger the challenge appears. The more you analyze, the more intimidating the step becomes. What might have been manageable with immediate action becomes overwhelming through prolonged avoidance. Fear grows in stillness. Courage strengthens in motion. And perhaps the most painful consequence of hesitation is regret. Not the regret of bold attempts, not the regret of courageous risks, but the quiet, persistent regret of unrealized possibilities. The knowledge that you might have acted, might have tried, might have moved, but did end. That kind of regret does not fade easily. It echoes because deep down you recognize the difference between inability and inaction. You can accept outcomes you could not control, but it is far harder to reconcile with chances you never took, steps you never attempted, decisions you never made. Life responds to movement. It cannot steer a stationary object. Direction emerges only after motion begins. Waiting for certainty before acting is like waiting for a road to appear beneath your feet without taking a single step. Momentum is created, not granted, and the individuals who transform their lives are rarely those who possess perfect conditions or complete confidence. They are those who understood that hesitation itself was the greater risk, that delay itself was the hidden danger, that action, even imperfect action, was the only path forward. Strength is not something you suddenly discover on a perfect day, under perfect conditions, when everything feels aligned and easy. That is the fantasy many people cling to, the idea that confidence will arrive first, that courage will precede action, that one morning they will wake up feeling completely ready to confront everything that intimidates them. But life does not work that way. Inner strength is not revealed in comfort. It is constructed through challenge. Most people underestimate how strength is actually built. They imagine it as a personality trait, something you either possess or you do not. They look at individuals who appear fearless, decisive, unshaken, and assume those qualities were granted by nature. What they fail to see is a hidden process. The countless moments of discomfort, the repeated confrontations with doubt, the deliberate choices made when retreat would have been easier. Strength is a result, not a gift. It grows the same way muscles grow, not through observation, not through intention, but through resistance, through tension, through stress that forces adaptation. You do not become physically stronger by avoiding weight. You become stronger by lifting it. The same principle governs the mind, the will, the character. Avoid difficulty and you preserve your current capacity. Engage difficulty and you expand it. Every small act of courage reshapes you, not dramatically, not instantly, but inevitably. When you take a step despite fear, when you speak despite uncertainty, when you act despite doubt, something subtle yet powerful occurs. You send a new message to your mind. I am capable of movement under pressure. That message matters because confidence is not built from positive thinking alone. Confidence emerges from evidence, from lived experience, from accumulated proof that you can face discomfort without collapsing, that you can encounter uncertainty. Why without surrendering? That you can feel fear without obeying it. This is why waiting to feel confident is such a trap. Confidence is not the prerequisite for action. Action is the prerequisite for confidence. The individual who appears bold today was once hesitant. The person who seems unshakable today once wrestled with doubt. What separates them is not the absence of fear, but the repeated decision to move anyway. Strength compounds. Just like hesitation compounds, just like doubt compounds, courage compounds as well. Each time you act with bravery, no matter how small the action may seem, you deposit into an internal reservoir of self-trust. Over time, that reservoir becomes deep, stable, reliable. You no longer rely on fleeting emotions to determine your choices because you have built a foundation stronger than temporary feelings. But there is an uncomfortable truth embedded here. Building strength requires voluntary discomfort. There is no shortcut, no alternative route, no painless method. You cannot develop resilience without encountering resistance. You cannot cultivate courage without facing fear. Abandoning the very process that would have made them stronger. Imagine a person stepping into cold water. The first reaction is shock, discomfort, resistance. Every instinct urges withdrawal, but remain long enough and the body adapts. What was once unbearable becomes manageable, then natural. The mind operates similarly. Exposure to challenge recalibrates your perception of what you can endure. What once felt impossible becomes uncomfortable. What once felt uncomfortable becomes routine. What once felt frightening becomes ordinary. This transformation does not occur through theory, it occurs through participation, through repeated engagement with situations that stretch your emotional and psychological boundaries. Strength is not built in grand gestures alone. It is built in daily choices, speaking when silence feels safer, acting when delay feels easier, persisting when quitting feels justified. Small victories shape identity, and an identity shapes destiny. If you consistently avoid discomfort, you construct an identity organized around protection. If you repeatedly confront discomfort, you construct an identity organized around capability. Over time, this distinction becomes profound. One mindset shrinks from challenge, the other grows through it. Inner strength is not loud. It is not the absence of fear or struggle. It is the quiet certainty, that you can face what is difficult without losing yourself, that you can endure tension without breaking, that you can move forward even when the path feels uncertain, and that certainty is earned, built moment by moment, choice by choice, action by action. No one can hand it to you. No one can bestow it upon you. It emerges from your willingness to lean into discomfort rather than flee from it. To treat challenge not as an enemy, but as a training ground. Failure carries a weight that most people fear long before they ever experience it. The word itself triggers discomfort, embarrassment, even shame. It is treated like a verdict, like a permanent label, like evidence of inadequacy. And because of this distorted perception, countless individuals spend their lives not pursuing success, but avoiding failure. But failure in its truest form is neither an identity nor a conclusion. It is an event, a moment, a piece of information, nothing more. The problem is not failure itself. The problem is the meaning people assign to it. When something does not work out, when an attempt falls short, when an outcome deviates from expectation, the mind rushes to interpret, I'm not good enough. This isn't for me. I should have known better. These internal narratives transform a temporary setback into a deeply personal judgment. What could have been a lesson becomes a wound. Yet see, insight of how growth actually functions in every domain of life. Learning is inseparable from error. Progress is inseparable from missteps. Mastery is inseparable from repeated imperfection. No skill, no craft, no achievement emerges fully formed. Every capability you admire was shaped through adjustment, correction, refinement. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of success. Every unsuccessful attempt contains data. It reveals what did not work, what must change, what requires strengthening. It redirects strategy. It exposes blind spots that comfort and ease would have kept hidden. In this way, failure is not a destructive force, but a corrective one. But only for those willing to interpret it correctly. Those who rise understand something others resist. Outcomes do not define potential. A single result, no matter how disappointing, cannot measure capacity. It can only measure a moment in time under specific conditions with specific variables. To treat failure as final is to misunderstand the dynamic nature of growth. Imagine a person learning to walk. Stumbling is constant, falling is unavoidable, yet no one looks at a child and declares, "This is proof they are incapable of walking." The falls are understood as necessary, expected, integral to development, and yet adults facing their own stumbles often respond with harshness rather than patience. Why? Because ego becomes entangled with outcome, because society conditions people to equate mistakes with weakness, because pride resists the vulnerability inherent in trying and not immediately succeeding. But the irony is profound. The fear of failure often inflicts more damage than failure itself. Fear prevents attempts. Avoidance preserves limitation. Engagement expands capability. Every individual who has ever achieved anything meaningful has encountered failure repeatedly, not as an exception, but as a companion. The difference is not that they were spared setbacks, but that they refused to interpret setbacks as evidence of futility. They extracted instruction instead of surrendering to discouragement. Failure, when viewed through this lens, becomes feedback. Feedback is invaluable. Feedback accelerates growth. Feedback transforms error into advantage. But this transformation requires emotional discipline. It requires separating self-worth from outcome. It requires resisting the instinct to internalize temporary results as permanent truths. A failed attempt does not mean you are incapable. It means you are in process, and process is where progress lives. Consider the alternative. A life structured around avoiding failure is a life structured around avoiding growth. No bold risks, no ambitious pursuits, no meaningful challenges, only carefully selected actions with guaranteed outcomes that may preserve comfort, but it suffocates potential, because anything truly worthwhile carries the possibility of failure. Innovation carries it. Growth carries it. Transformation carries it. To demand success without the risk of failure is to demand progress without participation. It is an impossible bargain. The path to competence, to excellence, to mastery is paved not with uninterrupted victories, but with continuous learning. And learning is born from friction. Failure is adjustment. Failure is evolution in disguise. What matters is not whether you encounter failure. That is inevitable. What matters is your response. Do you retreat, interpreting the setback as a stop sign? Or do you lean in, recognizing it as instruction? Do you allow disappointment to shrink your ambition, or do you allow experience to sharpen your approach? Resilient individuals do not romanticize failure, nor do they fear it. They normalize it. They treat it as a natural component of forward movement. They understand that progress is rarely linear, that growth is rarely smooth, that advancement is often messy and unpredictable. But within that unpredictability lies refinement. Within that refinement lies strength. Within that strength lies eventual success. Because failure does not prevent achievement. Quitting does. Misinterpretation does. Fear does. There is a voice that follows you everywhere. It does not belong to the world. It does not come from circumstances. It does not originate in other people. It lives inside your own mind, narrating your choices, interpreting your actions, shaping your perception of what is possible. And for many, that voice becomes the most powerful barrier they will ever face. Not external obstacles, not lack of opportunity, but internal doubt. Doubt is subtle. It rarely shouts. It whispers. It speaks in reasonable tones, presenting itself as caution, as realism, as logic. You're not ready. You're not good enough. This might not work. What if you embarrass yourself? These thoughts feel personal, convincing, authoritative, yet they're often nothing more than conditioned patterns, repeated so frequently they begin to sound like truth. But a thought is not a fact. A thought is a mental event, and mental events can be questioned. Most people never challenge the voice of doubt. They assume it is insight rather than noise. They accept its commentary as accurate rather than interpretive. Over time, this unexamined dialogue shapes identity. If you repeatedly tell yourself you are incapable, hesitation becomes natural. If you constantly rehearse worst case scenarios, fear becomes dominant. If you internalize limitation, potential remains dormant. The mind, left unmanaged, does not automatically serve your growth. It often protects your comfort. Understand something crucial. Your brain is designed for survival, not expansion. It prioritizes familiarity. It resists uncertainty. It generates caution in the presence of risk. This mechanism once kept humans alive in dangerous environments, but in modern life, it frequently manifests as exaggerated doubt, excessive worry, unnecessary hesitation. The voice of doubt is not always wisdom. It is often protection misapplied. And when that protection goes unquestioned, it becomes restriction. Think about how easily the mind constructs narratives. A single setback becomes I always fail. A moment of fear becomes I'm not confident. A challenge becomes this is beyond me. These conclusions arise quickly, automatically, without rigorous examination. The mind fills gaps with assumptions as reality. Yet human capability is not fixed. It is fluid, dynamic, expandable. But doubt freezes that fluidity. It attempts to define you by your past rather than your potential. It projects yesterday's limitations onto tomorrow's possibilities. It convinces you that discomfort signals incapacity rather than growth. Silencing doubt does not mean eliminating thought. That is impossible. The mind produces thoughts continuously. The real power lies in changing your relationship with those thoughts. Instead of obeying them reflexively, you observe them critically. Instead of identifying with every doubt, you evaluate it. Is this thought objectively true? Is it helpful? Is it directing me toward growth or away from it? This shift is transformative because once you recognize that not every thought deserves authority, you reclaim control over your internal landscape. Doubt may still appear, but its presence no longer dictates your decisions. Consider the difference between instinctive doubt and deliberate focus. Doubt scatters attention, magnifies uncertainty, amplifies fear. Focus redirects energy toward action, learning, adaptation. Doubt asks, this goes wrong. Focus asks, what can I do now? One paralyzes, the other mobilizes. Mental discipline is not about blind positivity or unrealistic optimism. It is about intentional direction of attention. Where your focus goes, your energy follows. Where your energy flows, your behavior forms. And behavior repeated becomes destiny. If you dwell on limitation, you reinforce. If you concentrate on possibility, you cultivate it. The most resilient individuals are not those who never experience doubt. They are those who refuse to treat doubt as command. They understand that fear-driven thoughts are natural but not necessarily accurate. They act based on values, goals, and reasoning rather than fluctuating mental noise because thoughts are transient, but decisions shape reality. There is also a profound truth many overlook. Confidence is not destroyed by doubt. It is destroyed by obedience to doubt. The presence of uncertainty does not weaken you. Consistently yielding to it does. Each time you act despite inner resistance, you weaken doubt's grip. Each time you retreat because of imagined inadequacy, you strengthen it. Doubt thrives on avoidance. It starves through action. This is why movement is so powerful. Action interrupts rumination. Engagement disrupts overthinking. Progress generates evidence that contradicts limiting beliefs. The mind updates its mind. Of reality, not through contemplation alone, but through lived experience. You cannot think your way into confidence. You behave your way into it. And gradually, the internal voice changes. What once insisted you can't becomes quieter. What once predicted failure loses credibility, not because doubt vanishes, but because you have accumulated proof of your own capability. Action is decisive. Your inner dialogue is not destiny unless you allow it to be. You are not required to accept every self-limiting narrative your mind produces. You are not obligated to surrender to automatic doubt. You can question, you can redirect, you can move forward while uncertainty lingers. There comes a moment in every life when thinking must end and deciding must begin. A quiet, uncelebrated moment where possibility stands before you, waiting not for more analysis, not for more hesitation, but for commitment. Because nothing truly moves until a decision is made. People often underestimate the power of decision. They treat it like a simple mental preference, a casual choice among options, something easily reversible and therefore easily delayed. But a real decision, a genuine internal commitment, is something entirely different. It is not merely choosing a direction. It is cutting off retreat. It is aligning your energy, your attention, your behavior toward a single course of action. Indecision drains power. Decision concentrates it. When you remain undecided, your mind wavers. One day you lean forward, the next you pull back. Doubt competes with desire. Fear competes with ambition. Energy disperses across conflicting possibilities. You feel busy, mentally active, constantly evaluating, yet nothing substantial changes because movement requires clarity, and clarity requires decision. A decision is a psychological shift as much as it is a practical one. It is the moment you stop negotiating with your fears, the moment you stop entertaining endless alternatives, the moment you declare internally and unequivocally, this is the path I will pursue. That declaration alters something profound within you. Uncertainty loses some of its grip. Hesitation weakens. Focus sharpens. The scattered mental noise that once dominated your thinking begins to organize itself around execution rather than speculation. You are no longer asking, should I? You are asking, how will I? That shift is everything. Many wait for perfect confidence before deciding. They imagine decision as the final step, the reward granted after doubt disappears and certainty arrives. But certainty rarely precedes commitment. Certainty often follows it. Confidence grows after the decision, not before it, because decision itself generates momentum. Consider how differently you behave when you are fully committed to something. When the internal debate ends, resistance diminishes. You stop seeking excuses. You stop scanning for easy exits. Your mind, no longer divided, directs its resources toward progress. Half-hearted intention produces fragile effort. Full decision produces persistence. This is why two individuals with similar abilities can experience radically different outcomes. One remains trapped in cycles of deliberation, forever preparing, forever waiting for the right moment. The other decides, commits, acts, and through action gains the very clarity and strength the first person was waiting to feel. Decision creates psychological ownership. Ownership creates progress. Yet decision is frightening for many because it carries accountability. To decide is to accept the possibility of difficulty, of failure, of unforeseen obstacles. It eliminates the comfort of maybe. It removes the protective shield of ambiguity. It demands that you confront reality rather than endlessly theorize about it. But this is precisely why decision is so powerful. It forces engagement with life. It transforms passive wishing into active pursuit. It converts potential energy into kinetic movement. Without decision, goals remain abstractions. Plans remain. In intellectual exercises, decision is the dividing line between those who imagine change and those who create it. And understand this clearly. Decision is not a feeling, it is an act of will.
You do not wait to feel decisive. You choose decisiveness.
You do not wait for fear to vanish. You move while fear lingers. Decision is not comfort, it is commitment, not ease, but resolve. Once made, a true decision restructures perception. Obstacles no longer appear as reasons to quit, but as problems to solve. Delays become challenges to navigate rather than signals to retreat. The mind adapts because the direction is no longer in question. This is why wavering is so destructive. Constantly revisiting the decision reopens the door to doubt. Reconsidering at every difficulty weakens resolve. Strength lies not merely in deciding, but in honoring the decision long enough for progress to compound. Because results require time, and time requires stability of direction. Every meaningful transformation begins with an internal line drawn firmly and without apology. A moment where you stop testing the waters of possibility and step fully into commitment. No guarantees, no perfect conditions. Just resolve. I will move. I will pursue. I will persist. Decision is not magic, but it is catalytic. It does not remove difficulty, but it activates growth. It does not promise immediate success, but it makes success possible. Without it, even the greatest potential remains dormant. Rising above fear is not a single moment of bravery. It is not one dramatic act that suddenly transforms you into someone unshaken and invincible. It is a process, a gradual, often uncomfortable evolution where you do not wait for fear to disappear, but learn to move beyond its authority. Fear does not vanish simply because you wish it away. It does not surrender because you demand confidence. Fear is persistent. It reappears at every new level of growth, every unfamiliar challenge, every meaningful step forward. And this is where many misunderstand the journey. They believe progress means no longer feeling afraid. But progress is not the absence of fear. Progress is the diminishing influence of fear. There is a critical difference. To rise above fear is to change your position relative to it. Fear may still exist, may still whisper, may still attempt to predict failure and exaggerate risk, but it no longer dictates your choices. It becomes background noise rather than controlling force. Present, yet powerless. This shift does not occur overnight. It is built through repeated encounters with discomfort. Each time you act despite hesitation, each time you proceed while uncertainty lingers, each time you refuse to retreat simply because something feels intimidating, you weaken faith. R's grip on your behavior. Fear thrives on avoidance. It weakens through exposure. Imagine standing before something that once terrified you. The first confrontation is overwhelming. Your mind races, your body resists, your instincts urge retreat. But you remain, you act, you survive the discomfort. The next encounter, though still uneasy, carries less intensity. With repetition, what once felt paralyzing becomes manageable, then familiar, then insignificant. Not because the world changed, because you changed. Growth recalibrates perception. Challenges that once seemed enormous shrink as your capacity expands. Situations that once triggered anxiety lose their power as experience accumulates. Fear is often a reflection not of objective danger, but of perceived inability. Strength in the sense of capability, and fear loses credibility. But here lies the deeper truth. Rising above fear is not merely about managing emotion, it is about redefining identity. As long as you see yourself as someone constrained by fear, hesitation feels natural, retreat feels justified, doubt feels authoritative. But when you begin to view yourself as someone who acts despite fear, who moves despite uncertainty, who persists despite discomfort, behavior changes to align with that identity. Identity drives action. Action reinforces identity. This cycle is powerful. Every courageous choice, no matter how small, contributes to a new self-concept. You are no longer the person who avoids difficulty, but the person who engages it. No longer the individual who waits for confidence, but the one who builds confidence through movement. No longer governed by fear, but informed by it, without submission. Fear does not disappear. You outgrow it, and outgrowing fear requires patience because transformation is rarely dramatic. It is built in ordinary moments, choosing to speak when silence feels safer, stepping forward when hesitation feels easier, continuing when doubt insists you should stop. These moments seem small, but they accumulate into profound change. Over time, something remarkable happens. The internal landscape shifts. Fear no longer feels like an immovable wall, but like a passing sensation. Challenges no longer appear as threats to avoid, but as tests to navigate. Uncertainty no longer paralyzes, but becomes a natural companion to growth. You develop a different relationship with discomfort, a different tolerance for risk, a different standard for your own potential. And perhaps most importantly, you discover a quiet certainty. Fear has limits. It can generate sensations, thoughts, predictions, but it cannot control you without your consent. It cannot dictate your future unless you surrender decision-making authority to it. Seeing above fear is ultimately an act of reclamation, reclaiming agency, reclaiming the power to act, regardless of emotional turbulence. Because courage is not a personality trait reserved for the few. It is a practice available to anyone willing to move while fear still speaks. It is built through behavior, strengthened through repetition, solidified through persistence. Fear may walk beside you, but it no longer leads you. And that is the transformation, not becoming fearless, becoming unstoppable despite fear. If you are ready to rise beyond the limits fear has tried to impose on your life, type I rise above.